I was born at home in a little house, well, between Muncie, Indiana, and Summitville, Indiana, somewhere in there. But I was born, like I said, at home, and a midwife was there helping, and my father was also going to hell. And this was not his first child, so I guess they thought, well, that would be fine. The only problem was when the birth started, he fainted, so he really wasn't much help. But he meant well, and I was born into this family where I had three older children. I had brothers and a sister, two brothers and a sister by my father's first wife, who had died, and my mother then had married him, and they had already had one daughter, Annabelle Jones, and then I came along and I was named Barbranell Jones. And we lived in several places as I was growing up. In fact, 13 to be exactly. We had moved 13 times before I had gotten married. And my husband said, couldn't you ever pay the rent? And I'm not sure really why we did move, whether that was part of it or whether they just liked to move. And in those days, parents did not come to the children and say, what shall we do about moving? Would you like to move? They would just say, we're moving, get ready, and we did. I don't remember where the first home was, but it seemed like when I first, knew what was going on and remembered, I lived in Jonesboro, Indiana, and I thought that was pretty appropriate for a girl named Jones. There, I've got this little town, named Jonesboro. And we lived, I do remember where we lived before that. We lived down in Jackson County, Indiana. That's where I think my brother was born. And he was born just, I think 18 months after I was. And the children were coming along rather regularly, and my half-sister, when I was born, decided she would move out. She said, if all they're going to do is have babies, I'm moving. So she left, and it wasn't long before she got married and started having her own babies. But anyway, we lived down in Jackson County, out in the country again, and the thing I most remember was that there were snakes there, and I was very afraid of snakes. So when I would go outside, I would constantly be aware that I was looking for snakes. I didn't want to get where they were. And my brother, when he was born there, and then when he got able to walk, the three of us, Annabelle and myself, and George was the baby's name, named after my father, who was George Clinton Jones. And the new baby was named George Lee Jones. We lived there until, it seems to me it probably was only about 5 years, but maybe it was more than that. But it was a great place, had a nice farm, and I recall one time we had a reunion there, and all of our relatives came down to have this reunion. There were many, many of them, and they started eating cantaloupes that my father had grown, and I remember they took a picture of just this huge mound of cantaloupe. It was a fun place to live. We did stay in Jackson County quite a while, and I don't really now remember how long, but we decided that we would move back up nearer to where I was born. So we went to this new place, and it was at the edge of Jonesboro, Indiana, and it was used to be a brick yard, so it was quite a nice big place, but I don't believe that I don't believe that the soil was anything that, you know, a farmer would be able to do anything with, because so I remember there were a lot of bricks still there, you know, sort of in the ground. And my daddy got a job working in the rubber factory, the Cyberling rubber factory there. And I do remember when I got a little bit older of going to see what kind of a job he was doing. And I was really impressed with these huge sheets of rubber that he would help pull out of a press. I thought, oh, it looked like really such a heavy job to my way of thinking. But he didn't seem to mind. And he wasn't a real young man, because when he married my mother, he was 43 and she was 23. So by this time, he must have been, well into his 50s, I would think, because that's where I started school. And first, my sister started a school. And I thought, oh, I'm just going to miss her so much. And my mother was a friend of my sister's teacher, and the teacher's name was Fern Hamilton, as I remember it. And being a friend of my mother's helped, I think, and they let me go to school a few days just to see where my sister was and what she was doing. But one day then, Miss Hanmore, I guess it was, called me up to her desk, and I went up there and she took me on her lap and she said, Barbranell, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you really are too young to go to school, so we'll just have to wait until next year for you to come to school. And oh, I was just heartbroken. I couldn't go to school anymore. So I had to stay at home for another year. But finally, I got to go to school. And I did it just like my sister had been doing it all year. We walked down a road. We lived, as I said, at the edge of town. And we walked down a country road. And then we walked down a railroad track. And when I think of that, I think, oh, how did my mother ever allow us to do that? It was all so dangerous when I think about it. But at the time, I loved it. We'd walk on the rails, you know, toward the school. And then we had to go through a woods. And I thought, oh, how did my mother let us do that? But I guess there was just nothing else she could do. We had to walk to school. And anyway, that's where we went to school. And of course, I was in the same room with my sister, because the first 5 grades were all in one room. And there was a huge potbelly stove of some kind, huge, with a big metal surrounding it, you know, piece of metal. It was very, very primitive, but I loved it. I just loved to go to school. And of course, when you think of it, with 5 grades in there, how you'd ever concentrate to do your own work, I don't know. But somehow it worked out. And we enjoyed our school, and we kept walking down the country road and down the railroad tracks and through the woods, and nothing ever got us. No bears, no nothing. I don't remember ever seeing an animal of any kind. And that was all very adventuresome to us. We thought that was lots of fun. That was the school. And we went there, and I seemed to learn to read and all those things you're supposed to learn in the first 5 years. And then after you finished those 5 classes, you'd go next door, which is in the same little building, and then there were the other classes. Finished there, you know, with 8th grade. Then, when it was time to go to high school, you would walk downtown to school. Well, anyway, I thought that was a very interesting way to learn. Be there with your, you know, sister right in the same room, and then it wasn't long till my brother was going too. And it was very comforting to me not to be in one little class all by myself, you know. You were there where you could listen to what they're learning and maybe get a little bit ahead. But it was fun. I enjoyed my school days. And then, of course, when we'd have recess, we'd all go outside and play together and have a great time. one particular incident stands out in my mind that wasn't so happy. I was told to draw something, and it seemed like it was a fir tree. And when I think of it, I can't think of anything it'd be easier to draw. But anyway, I took my paper and went back to make some little complaint to my teacher. And she said, "You go back there and sit in your seat and sit down and draw that picture." So I went back, and I guess I thought it was casually, tossed my paper on the table, and it flew right off my desk and on the floor, and I sat down to pick it up, and with that, something grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me so hard that I had an accident, a personal accident, and I had borrowed my sister's knickers to wear to school that day. Well, I just sat there. I didn't get up from that seat again until my sister came over and said, "Why are you sitting here?" And I explained my sad dilemma, and she said, "Oh, well, I'll take you home, Barbranell." So she went and got our coats, and we left. That's one of the sad incidents that happened to me, and I've never forgotten it. So I try not to think I can't do something. I'll make an effort at making that fir tree, especially since it's so simple. I don't know what I was trying to tell the teacher. I couldn't do it or what it was. Anyway, they would have spelling bees that I enjoyed very much. Each Friday afternoon, we had that to look forward to. We'd have a spelling bee, or we'd have something called ciphering, where two of us would go up to the board, and then they would tell us numbers to write down and what to do, whether to multiply or subtract or add or whatever it was. Oh, I loved that. And I liked very much the spelling bees too, and I could spell rather well, but I seem to have lost that knack now that I don't write much, and when I write a letter, sometimes I have to get that dictionary out and look things up. But I think I had a fair education there. I don't remember when we moved from Jonesboro, but my mother had gotten a job working in Marion at the Boston store, and she worked in the basement where there was a grocery store, that part of it. So she would drive there to work every day. And I think by that time that my father had quit working at the rubber plant. And finally, they decided, well, since my mother enjoyed working at that store, and it was in Marion, Indiana, which was a town not far from there, maybe, 5 or 10 miles, I'm not sure. But she would drive, and she liked to drive. And so we decided we would move to Marion, Indiana. And they bought a grocery store on South Booth Street, I believe it was. It seemed like it was 36 South Booth Street. And it was a nice grocery store, and then there was a lovely apartment above it where we lived, and which was a very nice arrangement. And we loved working in the grocery store, Annabelle and I. And of course, I don't know how much help we were, but we liked it. And our friends started coming in. And there was some kind of like a game that you could buy a piece of candy, and if you got the lucky one, well, you won something. Well, we were very quick to sort of point out to our friends where the right piece of candy was, That's just one little thing I remember about the store. Another thing that I have always had in my memory happened upstairs at that store. My mother was talking on the telephone to a friend, and we had a cat, and the cat pounced on her back. And I just, to this day, it frightens me when I think of it, because I've thought that cat was attacking her, and it frightened me so that ever since then I've been a little wary of cats. But I found that some of them are very nice, but that one really impressed me and intimidated me. But anyway, it wasn't long. I don't know just how many years, maybe 3. That's just a guess. But after we lived there a while, they bought another grocery store, and it was on the west part of town. And there was an interim. We moved from 36th Street to 38th Street, and that we just lived there in a home, but we no longer had the grocery store. And I don't remember now whether Mother went back to work at the Boston store. I'm not sure about that. But she was not at home, so she must have gotten another job. And Annabelle and I were in charge of doing dishes. And I remember that we would draw the water, we'd heat water, we're going to wash the dishes, and then we'd get sidetracked and play something, and then the water would be too cold, we'd have to heat it again. And sometimes it took us almost all day to get those breakfast dishes done because we were so frivolous, and we'd play, in between times. But anyway, that was our little bit of help for our mother. And it wasn't long until we moved from there then to the west side of Marion, Indiana, and had another grocery store. The grocery store in this case was separate from the house. We had a cute little house, as I remember, it was on the corner of Virginia, and I've forgotten the other street, but that's where we lived. And we liked working in that grocery store too. By that time we were old enough to really be a little help, and we would work in there. But one thing I would do was when I came home from school, I would go across the street, the side street there, to a neighbor lady who had been very, very friendly and kind to me, and she had a piano, and she was sort of trying to teach me how to play the piano. So I would always go over there. Oh, it was just a treat for me to come home from school and to be able to go over there, because my mother and father would be working in the grocery store and they would be busy. So I would play there a while and then I'd go to see them. But anyway, one day when I came in, the lady said to me, "I saw in the paper about your parents getting a divorce." And I said, "A divorce?" She said, "It's right here in the paper." And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about that." And of course I was shocked. And I went to the store and asked them. And my mother said, yes, we did get a divorce. And in a short time then, we packed up and moved away. But I was always so puzzled about it that we were never aware that there was any problem between them, and here they'd gotten a divorce. But I still think it was their difference in ages that made a great difference in their lives. My father was older, 20 years older, and he wasn't as peppy as my mother. And there may have been just some friction about that, I don't really know. But we did move away from my daddy and moved to Kokomo, Indiana. And in no time at all, there was a gentleman who appeared named John Townsend, and I realized that my mother had known him when we lived in Marion, and they did get married, and so we lived there on, what was that? I don't even remember what the name of the street was, but we had a nice house there, and he provided very nicely for us. And he had been a motorman on the interurban that went from Marion to Frankfort. But it wasn't long until they no longer had this interurban, as it was called. It was just a train, that went between the two towns. And then I don't remember what he did after that, but he lost his job. Time passed, and one of the things that the three of us, that is, Annabelle and myself and George, and we always called him Junior, and he got to the place where he didn't like to be called Junior, and he wouldn't answer unless we called him George. So he finally taught us what his real name was, and we called him George. And since his daddy wasn't there, he he didn't want to be called Junior because he wasn't a junior to his new daddy, whose name was John. So we called him George. And the three of us, would go to a nearby park that had a swimming pool. Just, I don't know whether it was a river or what it was. It wasn't cement or anything. It was very, it was a natural swimming hole. Lots of sand there and all. And a beach house, a little beach house. And we would someday just swim and play there all day long. And later in my life, I think I paid for all that because I got a lot of sun on my skin and had a little trouble with skin cancer later on, where I would get these little spots on my face. By the time I started high school, we had moved to South Webster Street. So I had, again, a nice walk to school, a mile or a mile and a half. And of course, the exercise was wonderful for me. So we would walk to high school and got along very well in high school, as did my siblings. We all did well in school, no problems to speak of. I don't think my sister liked to go to school as well as I did, and I'm not sure that she finished. Seemed like she just really didn't like it too well. But anyway, I got a job while I was in high school. Oh, and that's where my mother worked. She worked at Duke's Restaurant. She was a cook at Duke's Restaurant, which was a very nice restaurant in Kokomo. And I thought, well, since my mother works there, I'll get a job there. So I did apply, and they hired me to be sort of a menu typer and assistant cashier. So I would go to high school, and then at noon I would run to the restaurant and be the cashier, and then eat my lunch. See, that's the way I got lunch. I got to eat my lunch there, and then I'd run back to high school. And then after the school day was closed, I would go back to the restaurant and type the menus, and then I would walk on home and study if I had some more studying to do and any homework to do. Well, everything seemed to be going along all right, and I don't know, it was enjoyable. And then after a while, I think this must have happened after I graduated, and I did graduate in 4 years from the high school. And my brother, right behind me, did the same thing. But after high school, I got a job from Mr. Sam Neal, who was the manager of the theaters in this little town of Kokomo. I got a job as his secretary, and also I worked in the Sipe Theater, whatever that means, I don't know. The Sipe Theater and the Indiana Theater to sell tickets, when it was time for the movie to start. So I had that job of being his secretary and also the cashier. Seemed like I had to always have a couple jobs or so, to try to have a little extra money, because at this point, my stepfather was on something called WPA. What was that? Anyway, they helped you with while I was in school, they put that WPA all over my books. Everybody that saw them knew I was using these books that were furnished by the county or something for poor people, which we were, because my stepfather at that point was not working, and he may have been too old to work, I don't know. But he had been this interurban man, the motorman, and then they no longer had that. And so that was the story. And anyway, it was when they had something called bank night at the theaters, and they would people would buy tickets like you can't believe to get a chance on some money, because one day a week they would have this bank night, and then they would have a drawing, and somebody would win quite a lot of money for those times. And sometimes I would sell 1,000 tickets an hour which kept me pretty busy. Later, another friend of my boss named Fred Davies saw that I was sort of ambitious, and he asked if I would come to his company and work. And he was the manager of the local finance company. So that's what I did next. I still kept the job as cashier at selling the tickets at the theater, but I also worked for him all day prior to when I would go to work at the theater. And people were coming in there, getting loans, and this always made me feel sort of sorry for them, that they had to pay so much interest because they would come in to pay on their loan that they owed, and so much of it would go to interest that it took a very long time for the loan to be paid off. And my boss was so cute. He couldn't remember people's names, and at that point I could. So he would come over to me and say, "Who is that? Who is that?" So he could go up, and say, "Oh, hello, Mr. Smith. How are you today?" But he always came to me to tell him what the name was. Trying to decide what to do next. And I did still work for Sam Neill, and his office was upstairs at the theater. And I remember one time, as I was working as a secretary, I just paused to go outside the door. I don't know why, but to look down at the crowd that was waiting to get in the theater. They were in the lobby, but they, hadn't gotten a seat yet. And I looked down and I saw a blonde-haired young man, and I knew the girl that he was with. Her name was Betty Wells. And I had a boyfriend named Dick Schrader. And I knew that she had a big crush on Dick Schrader. But anyway, he asked me out, so I was going with him, had a few dates with him. And I looked down, and here was Betty Wells, and she was with a very blonde-haired young man that I had looked at and thought, I'm not sure who that is, but I think it might be Jack Taubensee, might be his name. Well, I was right, that was his name, because a few days later, I got a telephone call, and he asked if he might take me home from work, and I said, well, thanks, but no thanks, and hung up. And I guess that sort of annoyed him or intrigued him or something. But anyway, the next time he called my house, and he asked whether or not I would like to go to the theater over in Marion, Indiana, which was not far from there. And I said, well, that sounded very nice. Yes, I would like to do that. So we set up a date. Well, I think it was about that time that I started going to the Kokomo Junior College. I thought, well, my parents can't afford to send me to college. I'll just work and go there. And I also got a job being the secretary to Dean Schmalschried, who was the head of the junior college. Well, anyway, again, I was collecting lots of work to do. And after all, I had to work. We needed the money. So my friend that I saw at the theater, the blonde-haired guy, and I had made this date. So he came for me at home, and we did go over to Marion, Indiana, to the theater. I don't know at all what kind of a show, but it was some kind of a movie. The thing I remember most was he tried to hold my hand, and I jerked my hand away, and I said, I don't know you very well. And I don't know, I guess that was a different response than he was used to, because he did take me home, and we had several dates after that. And the rest of the story. I did finally marry that blonde-haired, impulsive man that tried to hold my hand, and he never let me forget that. He thought that was quite amusing. I was so shy. But anyway, I I finally quit working at the theater, and I just worked at the local finance company, as I remember it. I was whittled down to one job. So, and still was having dates with this young man who lived in the west end of Kokomo, which was different than the south end where I lived. He was really where it was quite, exclusive. And he had a nice home, and he would invite me there, and his mother would invite me there for dinner. And, oh, her name was Babe. Even my husband called her Babe, which I thought was really so strange. Everybody called her Babe. Nobody called. She had two sons. Tom, Jack is the older, and Tom, the younger son, and they both called her Babe, so I called her Babe too. Everybody did. And oh, they had a lovely, comfortable home, and I just thought how nice it all was. Well, anyway, we got better acquainted, and I recall one sort of strange episode where I had a date to go over to I started to say my husband, but Jack Taubensee's house. And I fell asleep, and I awakened after the time I was supposed to go over to his house. And I asked my brother if he would drive me over there. So George drove, I got all dressed up, and George drove me over there, and their house was dark. And I thought, oh, they're not even at home. But then the lights came on, and I go up to the door, knock, and Jack came to the door, and I go barging in, and I said, when I have a date, I have a date. Because he had called and said, it was late, and since I hadn't got there. Well, anyway, I marched in, and I was so embarrassed because they had company. A man from Chicago was there that I later came to know quite well. But he was visiting. I thought, oh dear, I just barged in there and said, when I have a date, I have a date. And he never let me forget that. He used to, in years to come, he would taunt me and say, oh, I remember meeting you. You were that bold hussy who crashed our party. But it was only he was there from Chicago with, and Jack's father, Henry, was there. And Henry, of course, worked in Chicago. And by this time, Jack was working there too. They would drive up to Chicago on Monday and then work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Friday afternoon, they'd drive back to Kokomo. So he lived really both places, He lived in an apartment no, I think they had just rooms in the, what was the name of that? I was going to say Midtown Hotel, but that isn't quite right. But they lived in a hotel. And then they worked in the Civic Opera building. They had a brokerage out of the Civic Opera building. And my husband loved to be there, but he would come home every weekend, to be at his old home where he had grown up for quite a few years, and to see his mother and his grandfather who lived with them. And the grandfather at this point was well in his 80s, and they called him J.W., John, and he'd say John, J.W. is what they'd call him, but his name was John Valentine, he always said. I don't know whether that was Valentine, I don't know. Wingard was his last name. But anyway, Babe and her father would live there, and she had somebody with her, and Henry would be gone with Jack up to Chicago. So that was their life. Oh, it had been that way for quite some time. And I always wondered why Babe didn't move to Chicago. And after Jack and I got married, then she did move up here, and they lived in Lake Forest. I believe it's Lake Forest. Lake Forest. They rented a home there to try to decide where they should live, and finally they bought a home in Kenilworth. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to the time where Jack was coming back to Kokomo on the weekend, I, of course, would always get to see him then. And one time on one of our dates, he said, I believe I'm going to get a new car. He absolutely adored cars. And he said, I think I'm going to get a new car or I'm going to get married. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Oh, and I forgot to say that very nearly our first date, maybe it wasn't on the first date, but very shortly after we started going together, I had mentioned one time that I never wanted to get married and I never wanted a fur coat. And he said, would you put that in writing? I said, well, of course, it didn't mean anything to me. That's the way I felt. I wasn't going to get married and I never wanted a fur coat. And anyway, it wasn't long. Let's see, it was in 1940, one night. Oh, I forgot to say, after his message to me that he was either going to get a new car or get married, the next time I saw him, he had a beautiful new car. And I thought, well, he got that all straightened out in his mind. He was into Oldsmobiles at that time. And I thought, well, he made a good choice. But it wasn't very long until one night I was over at a friend's house. And how he found out where I was, I don't recall telling my mother, but maybe I did. Some way he found out I was there, and he called and asked if I would like to go and get married that weekend. And I said, you're drunk. He said, no, I'm not. But it was just so crazy because he had made that big decision about the new car, and he knew I never wanted to get married. But, it didn't take him long for him to talk me into it. And he said, well, I'll pick you up Friday night, and my brother Tom will be with us, and we will drive to, I think it was Covington, Kentucky. Oh, I should have brushed up on all these facts, I'm afraid, before I started to tell all this. I just didn't realize, you don't think about these things that happened 60-some years ago too often. But anyway, that next day, on my lunch hour from the loan company, I was still there at the loan company, I ran out to Turner's, which was the best store I knew of there in Kokomo, and I bought my wedding dress. It was dark green with trapunto on the jacket somewhere. Pretty scrolly things here, it was very nice. And anyway, that was it. And I thought, now that'll be fine. And I could wear it then. I was very practical. I could wear it forever, if I stayed the right size. But anyway, Friday night, he came to my door. Of course, I was all packed up and ready to go. And I told my mother what I was doing, and she cried. She said, oh, everybody knew it before I did. And I said, Mother, I told her the night I got the telephone call, I said, nobody knows it but myself and you. I said, I haven't told anybody else. But she wasn't ready for it either. And she probably remembered that I was never going to get married. And of course, I didn't know how to cook because I had often watched her cook, but I thought, I'm just always going to be here. She's always going to cook for me, I guess. And I didn't know how to do anything in that kitchen. And I thought, oh dear. I had tried a few times to have her teach me things, but she'd say, well, take a lump of butter the size of a walnut. Well, I wanted to know how many tablespoons, and that was the way she'd cook, and a handful of flour, and then some milk. Well, I thought, how does she ever make all this good food if that's the way she does it? But she'd done it for years, and she knew how to do it. Well, I just wrote that off as something I didn't need. And anyway, when the doorbell rang Friday night, I go to the door, and he said, oh, you're all ready to go to Frankfurt to the basketball game, I'll bet. And I said, you were drunk. And then, of course, he giggled and laughed, and it was just a big joke. But I thought, oh, dear. Oh, dear, he's fooled me. But anyway, it was on the level, and his brother was in the car, and he went with us. And we did drive all night and got there. And The next day, we stayed at that hotel, I remember. I think it was, oh, I don't know the name now. But anyway, we got there okay. And the next day, we tried so many times to get over to Covington to get this wedding performed. And of course, we had to find a place. And I was a regular church goer. And of course, I thought, well, we should be married in a church. So we stopped at a parsonage. And this man was kind enough to say if we'd come in and he could talk to us and, you know, get acquainted with us and find out, you know, tell us a few things about married life and what have you, then he would marry us. Well, then they remembered they hadn't gotten my orchid. They were supposed to get me a big orchid. So then we had to go back again. One more time, we'd go across the bridge for some reason or other and get the flower. Now we came back again. We were all ready. Well, of course, we only had Jack's brother with us, and we needed two witnesses. So I think the maid's name was Lovey, a black maid, stayed outside these doors that you open, you know, where they roll back. So she stood there, and the minister performed the wedding ceremony. Well, he asked us to write to him every year on our anniversary. And I think we just coped with the first one and let it go at that. You know, promises. But that was our wedding. And then, of course, we went back to this hotel. And it was a very well-known hotel that I've forgotten the name of. And, of course, we had 2 rooms, and Jack and I occupied the one. So that was our wedding night. And the next day, I was trying to think, I believe Tom went home the next day. Oh, in fact, we all went home because, after all, we had one car. And we all went home, and we were going to keep the wedding a secret. That was November 30th. And I told my husband, my new husband, that I had worked all year at the local finance company, and I would get a nice bonus at Christmas time, and I didn't want to make the announcement about my wedding until I had my bonus. I said, it seems only fair to me when I've worked all year to get a Christmas bonus. And I knew by experience that when the other girls got married, he fired them on the spot. Why, I don't know, but if they were married, they were out. And I thought, well, I don't want to tell him. So I just stayed at my mother and father's house, and my husband would come down to visit on the weekend, and then we'd go over to his parents' house, and I got to stay over there. Well, this went on then all month till December 25th, and I thanked my boss profusely for this lovely check that I had. And then I said, but I do have to tell you something. I did get married, so I will not be here any longer. He said, oh, you can't quit. I need you. I suppose he meant to tell him who the people were at the counter paying their bill. But I said, well, I'm sorry, but I'm moving to Chicago. Oh, I don't think he liked me very much at that point. But I was so sure, it was all over when he found out I was married. That's what I thought, because it had been the way of other people. But no, he said, oh, you just can't go now. I said, well, I'm sorry, but I have to. Well, that's just the way it was. I had to do that because I couldn't let my new husband go back alone when he's planning to take me back there to see the new apartment. He had gotten busy. He had gotten the apartment for us. He had taken his aunt who lived in Chicago, Aunt Ina. This was Babe's sister, and she lived in Chicago on Lakeshore Drive, 1448 Lakeshore Drive. Oh, and what I thought was the most beautiful apartment I ever saw in my life. It was lovely. Well, she went with Jack, and they went to the merchandise mart and ordered furniture. And I still have the furniture today that they ordered. This couch that I'm sitting on was one of the things they purchased. And we had, 2 matching chairs, sort of a modified, not a wing chair, but it had a handle, a nice wooden handle. It was very, on each arms, the arms were wooden, and it was very pretty. Well, they just had everything. They bought a drop leaf table and chairs, and it was very nice. They had just done all of that. So when I got there, it was very simple, just to sort of move in there at that apartment on 1448 South Drexel Boulevard. And it was a very busy place. And I adjusted to it very well. I thought, well, this is a nice spot. Of course, it's a big city that I knew nothing about because I had never lived in a big city. I guess Kokomo, Indiana was the biggest town I'd ever lived in, and certainly it wasn't very big. Maybe, I don't remember what the population was, but it was just a little town, And so when I moved there, the first thing I had to face was I knew I didn't know how to cook. And I said to my husband for the first dinner, what would you like to have, honey, for dinner? Well, I think I'd like to have a steak. And I thought, oh, all right, I'll go to the butcher shop. So I got myself out and walked to the butcher shop. And I noticed several cars would stop beside me, and I didn't think anything about it. And I went to the butcher shop, and I said, I'd like a steak, please. And the butcher said, well, what kind of steaks would you like? What kind of a steak? I said, well, what kind do you have? He knew right then that he had really an experienced cook. And he named off all the steaks he had. And, all rib steak, beef tenderloin, and all and on. And when he got to round steak, I said, oh, that sounds good. I'll have round steak. So I take my meat home, and I suppose I went on, shopped at a grocery store to get other things. And I got back home, and I said to my husband, I don't know why, but several men stopped in their cars when I was going shopping. They said, well, what were you doing? And I said, well, I would look to see if there's anybody I knew. I was used to saying hello. I knew everybody in Kokomo practically, and I was just looking for somebody that I knew to wave to or talk to. He said, now, honey, when you go to the store, promise me that you'll look straight ahead and walk real fast. Don't glance at the cars. Well, so he got me straightened out on that, and I did better. The commute between my apartment and the store I was able to make without all kinds of cars stopping to a screech. Oh, I had so much to learn, especially about the cooking, because that night I broiled the round steak. Well, we couldn't eat a single bite. It was so tough. So I thought, how will I ever learn this? So I got some cookbooks and really had to study what to do. And finally was able to cope with that. But the first meal was one of those disasters. I don't know whether we went out for dinner or just forgot the whole thing. But it was sad. Well, what else happened to me there? Aunt Ida was wonderful. She made the most fantastic draperies for our windows there in the apartment. Oh, I just thought I'd never seen anything so lovely in my life. They were sort of a dark, old rose, almost satin-like. They just had a lovely sheen to them, and she made them all by hand. And she made them so long that we just draped them at the end in great, it just looked so beautiful. I could hardly stand it. I just want to stand and look at my beautiful draperies. And to think she did it all by hand, that was a labor of love. And she certainly was fond of Jack and, of course, Tom. And I think she grew to love me, too. She was very sweet to me. And she tried to teach me what Chicago was all about. She would take me to the Chicago Athletic Club, I think it was, and they would have all kinds of book reviews and musical things. She was very generous in taking me to experience different things, and I certainly loved it. And I would go to her apartment whenever I could because, oh, it was so pretty. My husband decided we better buy a home. If we're going to have this family right away, we better buy a home. So we looked around and we found a place in Lincolnwood, Illinois. And it was just a suburb of Chicago. And the house that we looked at was on Trumbull Avenue, 6654 Trumbull Avenue. And it was a brick house, a two-story house, and the entrance was on the left. You'd go up a few steps. The house was elevated, and we'd go up a few steps and then up to the front door. And the only thing I could see when I got inside the house and looked out a big picture window there in the front, there was a huge water tank. I said, I don't believe I could ever live here. All I can see when I look out, my eyes just go immediately to this huge tank. And I thought, it wasn't very pretty. Well, we went through the house, and it was a very nice, comfortable house, and one that my husband said, we can afford it, it'll be fine. And so we did buy it. And it was a two-story house with, I can't remember, it seemed like when I think of it, it was a 3-bedroom and a bathroom up there on the second floor. And the kitchen and a dining room and this lovely living room with the big picture window. And I thought, well, maybe I can learn to live with that, because it was a comfortable house. And I can't remember whether I believe we built the screened-in porch off the dining room. I don't think they had that when we moved in there, nor did they have a garage. So we had a garage built there after we moved in, and it was a very comfortable home for us. And there was a nice basement that my husband got busy and refinished it, made a nice game room down there, because I found out he was a man that liked to have parties. Well, that was okay, and we were there not too long, I think. I don't remember exactly when we moved in there, maybe September. I remember sewing frantically on little clothes, little nightgowns and things for our new baby. And of course we shopped, and Aunt Ina shopped, and Babe shopped. And my goodness, Mrs. Lespinasse couldn't give me enough things. I just was embarrassed. Every time I go to see her daughter, the doctor, here would be another package. And I said to Mrs. Lespinasse, you really mustn't spend all this money on me. She gave me a complete outfit in pink, pajamas with a robe to match, a pink one. There was also a blue one. And then she started giving me house robes, And I said, please stop. I said, well, you're spending all the money that I'm going to pay for this. You're spending it on me. I said, now don't give me another thing. And I said it like I meant it. And I really got her stopped. But it seemed to me like she thought that baby was her granddaughter, and she was going to give lots of things. Well, anyway, this one night, I awakened my husband that I had indigestion. Well, of course, I had labor pains, is what I had. So we called, and we got ready, hurried around and got ourselves to the hospital. And that was in Chicago. I think it was Wesley Memorial Hospital. That's where it was. And I was in a new wing, and I was the only one in that wing. And one time a nurse came and said, "Oh, I didn't know anybody was in this wing." And I thought, what if they forget I'm here and I'm just here alone? Well, anyway, the labor was fine. I don't think it was anything too bad. After I called her and told her I had indigestion, said, "You get dressed and come to the hospital. You're having labor pains." So my husband went with me, and I don't think it was an extremely long labor. I don't really remember. I was so thrilled when I saw that little baby. There she was, just beautiful. And we named her Gay Ann Taubensee. And she was just adorable. But I stayed in the hospital 10 days. On the 9th day, up to this point, you hadn't gotten up at all. You're just lying in the bed, being an invalid. And when I stood up, I was so dizzy, I thought I would fall down. But that's the way they did it then. On the 9th day, you could get up, and the 10th day, you would go home. So it was kind of a shock to me how I felt. I just gotten so weak. And when we went home, they said, "You will have a nurse with you at home." I said, "Oh no, I didn't know I had to have a nurse." So I thought, now what'll I do? So I called back to Kokomo. My dear friend Charlotte Wright, she was my closest buddy, and her mother was a nurse. So I asked if she would come up, and of course she did. She came up and helped us, so we were fine. And then when my husband would look at Gay, he would just melt. And one time, he was looking at her in her crib, in her cradle, I should say. She had a little cradle, and I think it was in Jack's family. And here, of course, it'd break your back when you lean over to try to take care of her. But it was wonderful to sit beside her, and then you could sort of rock the cradle, and oh, she loved that. One night, Jack was looking at her, and he said, "Honey, if we'd known she was so wonderful, we'd have had her earlier." I said, "I don't think so. She was born a year and 13 days after we got married." And I think that was plenty early, and that people were probably counting on their fingers at that point. But oh, he said, "Isn't she nice?" He just loved how she looked. She was beautiful. I don't know how we ever produced her, but she was just a beautiful baby. Little blonde hair, little curls, so cute. He had a garage built for his cars because, he loved cars. And my mother-in-law said, "Barbranell has to have a car." I said, "I do?" We hadn't even had a family car most of the time. Here, I had to have my own car. I said, "Well, I didn't know that." I said, "Well, you have to have a car." And so Jack got me a black Ford convertible. And oh, it was nice. I don't think I knew how to drive, but he must have taught me, because I learned how to drive, and I didn't take lessons from anybody else. So there we were, our little family of 3, and we just were getting along fine. Jack had gotten a job just down the street, at the end of our street, Bell and Howell. There was a factory, Bell and Howell, who were in the making things for the war, which we were in. And so my husband got a job there, and he had that position for quite a while during all that war effort. He was working for Uncle Sam, making, I think they made sights for the guns. That's where Jack worked, and he seemed to like it and have a good time there. And it was about this time that we met Ralph Tyson, who lived down the street from us on Trumbull. Ralph Tyson and Jane Tyson. And they became our dear friends, and were friends for years till they moved away and died. But anyway, and also a short time after that, we met John and Chris Colmar, who remained our friends forever until John just passed away a short time ago here in 2004. But John was a lawyer, so we had him as our lawyer for anything that we needed a lawyer for. And they were our good friends. Well, wasn't long, 2.5 years, we had another baby, a little boy, and his name was Thomas Henry Taubensee. And he was something else. When the nurse first brought him into my room at the hospital, he looked like he had been worrying about whether he was going to get out of where he was for 9 months. He had the deepest frown marks, and his nose was kind of pushed to one side. And the nurses, when I exclaimed, "Now, my, he's not so pretty," then they called him handsome ever after that. And this was during the war, and they had him all wrapped up in a plaid, kind of gray and blue plaid blanket, which wasn't very pretty either. And they'd say, "Here comes handsome." And I wish they could see him today. He is a handsome man. But there he was, all worried up. Just had that little frown on his face. But it didn't take him long to change it to a smile. And of course, Lenny, I'm getting my babies mixed up. Gay had a good time pretending she was his mother. She would just, take care of him, put the blanket up and do all kinds of things to help him. She was a cute little nurse to him, and he was so sweet. And my goodness, in 2 years, another baby. And this was a handsome lad named Mark William. Oh, he was good looking. He hadn't been worrying about a thing. Just had a sweet expression on his face. And if they'd have called him handsome, it would have been true. He would just look beautiful. But he was a head bumper. I found that out soon. When he could sort of get up on his knees, he would get up on his knees and hit the head of his bed. I thought, oh, this poor boy. And I put a padding all around. He could move his bed by hitting his head, and that would give enough emphasis that the bed would move. Oh, I loved that. I thought, he'll never know anything. He'll have his brains all ruined. But somehow I think it must have stimulated him, because he had no trouble with school, just zoomed right through. Every course, every year he did fine. And then in, I think September of 1947, my husband decided we should move up north to the North Shore, and his parents by that time had brought Babe up here, and they had a rented house in Lake Forest, and then they looked around where they wanted to live, and they decided they would like to live in Kenilworth. So they bought a house in Kenilworth. And when we bought a house in Winnetka, it was on Winnetka Avenue, but we were on the south side of the street, and that put us into the Kenilworth School District, which was really wonderful. That's where the Joseph Sears School was, and everybody knew that was a good school. So that's where my children got to go to school. And when we moved to Winnetka, I was pregnant again, and I think we moved there in September, and then Linda was born on our wedding anniversary, November the 30th. And she was another little cutie with dark hair. And now we had our family, 2 boys and 2 girls. And we thought, now we're all fixed up. And that's where the children went to school, at the Joseph Sears School. And of course, I remembered how I walked on the railroad track and how I walked through woods, and I took my children to school. Just spoiled them, I suppose, and maybe didn't let them get the good exercise they might have gotten by walking. But I took them to school. I was their chauffeur. And times when they would get older, I'd say, Well, you can walk down if you want to. And they would go in an underpass to go under Green Bay Road, which made it really simpler for them and for me. I didn't have to worry about them getting run over when they're crossing that very busy street. So that's the way they did that. And they got along well in school. I think they all liked it very much. They had good teachers, and they did lots of things for the children there. It was just, I was very pleased with the school, and would try to go to everything I could, when they had some kind of an entertainment or something that they did. And there was something called Scamper Night. Well, I didn't know if I'd live through the first one or not, but I got used to it. When they said Scamper Night, I wondered why they called it that. My word, it was everybody scampering up and down the aisles. It was just chaos, I thought. But when the production would start, they'd have a little play. Then everybody would sit down and pay attention to it. But it was a busy night, Scamper Night. That was one of the big highlights, I think, of that school. And the children all liked it very much. And in Mr. Karp's class, I don't know, that must be about the 7th grade, he would have geography baseball, where they would, where he would pick out remote places over the map, and then they would come up to find the place. So that was a game he had made up. And our boys, of course, were Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, and Mark was even he was an explorer. He did very well. I don't think Tom really got into it that much. But it was a good school, and I think they had a pleasant experience then in grade school. And then, of course, after Joseph Sears, they would go to New Trier East. It was just New Trier then, because there was no West, but they went to New Trier, and that was rated very highly as a high school. And I think they all liked it. They would first go to their homeroom, where they, talk about a few things, and then in the different periods, they would go to different classes. And I was very pleased with how they did in school, and I was pleased with the school, both the schools, New Trier and Joseph Sears. I think they got a good education. After high school was college, I guess that's what I can say. And Gay was first, and she decided to go to Purdue. She went there, and then when it came Tom's turn, he went to Illinois, down in Champaign, Urbana. And of course, my husband provided a car for each one of them. I think Gay took a Porsche that we had gone with the Porsche Club to Germany and had purchased. I guess I forgot to tell about that, but we did have a nice trip. Aunt Ina served as our babysitter, and we did go with the Porsche Club to get new cars. We were going to get a white Porsche and a red Volkswagen. The Volkswagen was for Tom. And we did fly into Stuttgart, and of course there was a great throng of people to meet us. They treated us like celebrities, and we went out to this Schloss, I think they called the castle, and there were all of our Porsches. And as I remember, they had them parked in this initial PCA, Porsche Club America. And there was our pretty little white Porsche with a black top, and I think a black interior. I'm not sure. And we got our Porsche, our car, and of course we had some meals there at this castle, and then we all went our separate ways with our new cars to try them out. And one of the first things we did, before we went individually, they had us go out to a racetrack where we were going to meet a racer. Forgotten his name. He was a well-known racer, and he was driving a Porsche, and he was taking us around this track, you know, to show us how well a Porsche did. And I got in the car and went first, and oh, I just thought it was so exciting. I think we went 140 miles an hour, and that impressed me. Boy, I was really going speedy. And here was this wonderful driver that knew what he was doing, and everything was fine, you know, and I just sat there and enjoyed it all, and got back, and I said, oh, honey, you are going to love this. You're just going to love it. And he didn't look like he was so sure about it, but I told him, oh, you have to go. It's magnificent. Well, he got in. When he came back, he was so white. And I said, what is the matter? My God, he's scared to death. I said, well, didn't you know that's a professional driver who was driving? Oh, I knew it, but he said, it was too much for me. It was too fast. And I said, well, I'm sorry. I thought it was great. He said, oh, it scared me to death. And I kept saying, well, he's a professional driver. Later, we read that he had had an accident and was killed, you know, in a race. I thought, oh, well, he knew how to drive so well. But I guess you just can't count on that. Sometimes accidents do happen. But anyway, we certainly loved that car. And after he scared my husband, we took off to go just drive around wherever we wanted to, go to Switzerland and look it over and just, you know, check things out. And the car was just wonderful. Oh, I forgot to tell you what I said to my husband. When we landed at the airport at Stuttgart, I said, hon, I believe I'm pregnant. And he said, hon, I think the flight has addled your brains, because we left 4 teenagers at home. He said, I think the flight addled your brains. So we got in our car and we drove to Switzerland. And the first linen shop I saw, I said, oh, stop, I have to go in that shop. He said, you do? I said, yes. I went in there and I bought some baby things. And when I came out, I showed him to him, and he said, showed them to my husband, he said, now I know you're crazy. Oh dear. Well, anyway, we picked up the Volkswagen. Well, let's see, we couldn't pick it up, could we? But we went to see the Volkswagen, and it was a pretty red one. That was for Tom. Oh, of course, he was going to drive the other kids around, you know. But he could drive then, and, you know, he needed wheels. So we got that, ordered that, and of course they shipped the cars home to us. But we drove around in our Porsche, and every place we'd go, the little kids would say, Schnell, Schnell. I think that meant swift or something. Anyway, they were very enthusiastic when they saw us in the car, and we were loving it. It rode so beautifully, and we had such a good time. And we did drive through the Black Forest, and the unfortunate thing was there was a repair job happening there on the Autobahn, and we didn't get to get on there and ride real fast. But at this point, I wasn't sure my husband even wanted to go any faster than we were going. So we didn't get to race there. We did go to visit some of Jack's customers that he had. By this time, I think I forgot to mention, they had moved out of the Civic Opera building, and they had built a plant, a Taubensee Steel and Wire Company they had built in Franklin Park. And so Jack, you know, was visiting some of his customers over there. It wasn't long till it was time for us to go back home. So we had to fly back home and wait for our cars to arrive. And when they arrived, we were happy to see them. And Tom was thrilled with the Volkswagen. Oh, he thought that was great. But my husband had this thing. I suppose then it was handed down to Mark. I don't know. to drive around in, because when Tom went to college, which was in a short while after that, he he got a new taffy apple red Corvette. That's what he had to take to school. And I'm afraid he spent more time with the car than the books. But getting back to that message that I had given to my husband, when we got home, I still felt convinced I was pregnant and went to the doctor, and she confirmed it, that I indeed was pregnant. And my husband couldn't believe it. He said, "Why, you're too old." He didn't once say he was too old, but he said, "Well, you're too old." And I said, "Well, we just have to see about that." And of course, I had this beautiful little baby, and she was fine. Oh, I was so thrilled when I saw that, everything was perfect with her. 2 legs, 2 arms, everything was fine. She was just really great. And I'll have to say that all of our children enjoyed having her around. Mark especially took great joy in taking her little stroller and knocking it down till it looked like a speedster of some kind. Made her a little car, And oh, she was sitting there, it was so cute. And they, of course, all think I spoiled her. And I did, and they don't realize they did too. They helped spoil her. And in fact, the boys would go out on the sidewalk and ask the people going by if they'd like to come in and see their new baby sister. And I said to my husband, "Do you think they're selling tickets?" But she was cute, and they knew it, and they were proud of her, and they wanted to show her off. And she went right along with it. As she grew older, she was just enjoyed the whole thing. And our Linny, of course, was a teenager by that time. Well, when Linda was 3 years old, I remember she ran faster than any 3-year-old had done in 60-some years. And I said to the boys, "Thank you for training Linda," because they would run to try to get away from her, because she always wanted to play with them, and then she would run after them just like the wind to catch up. So I said that was her training. And there she did win that honor of being the fastest 3-year-old. So we had lived there quite a while before we went on that trip to get our Porsche. I know I enjoyed it all and did my best to be the best mother I could. But one thing all those older children remember was when we lived in Winnetka, we had forsythia bushes, and that was what they had to do, go out and cut their own switch when they were naughty. And then I would switch their little legs, and they all remember that quite well. But I think it helped turn them into mighty nice people. They're just as nice as they can be. And I thought, well, that was my duty, I thought, to whip their little legs if they didn't do just right. And the boys liked being there. They had nice companions just to the east of us where the Covens lived, and they had 2 boys, so they enjoyed Johnny and Tony very much. Kind of grew up with them. And there was something about a BB gun piercing the windows. I believe it was our boys accidentally shot their windows in. I think that's the way it was. So we had a few little times there where it was, sort of testy. We had trouble a bit, but we get it all fixed up. Oh, and one thing they loved to do, just west of us was an empty lot, and they would go out there. I think all 4 of them go out there and dig and dig and dig. I don't know what they were digging, but they just liked to go out there and dig in the dirt. And I thought, well, it seemed like good exercise, all that digging and they were playing and having a great time. And I remember one time a truck came and the wheel sort of fell back into the hole they had dug, and they were very proud to tell the man they dug that hole. I thought, oh dear, I hope we don't get sued. But he was very nice about it. Maybe he remembered being a little boy once. One thing I thought was kind of funny, when we moved to Chicago, Jack and I was pregnant. We lived there on Drexel Boulevard. I would walk to the store, and there was a butcher shop. I would go to a special butcher shop, and sometimes I would take my baby when she got big enough. She would go along. I suppose I took her in a buggy, but she'd go in the butcher shop with me. And then later, when our little Tommy was born, she said, "Well, he looks like Henry the Butcher." I got such a kick out of that. I don't know. I didn't notice that Henry the Butcher looked worried, like Tom looked. Maybe that's what she saw. These frown marks and all. And of course, my husband teased me so about that, because it was the time of meat rationing, and everything. It became a silly joke among us. "Oh, Tom, you look like Henry the Butcher." Yes, we're out here at Tom and Alma's home down in Bloomington, Indiana, out in the country.
And the hummingbirds are pretty noisy.
Is that what we're hearing?
The hummingbirds.
Oh, there are hummingbirds all around this lovely screened-in porch. There are hummingbird feeders, and there are two right over there. Too bad they can't see that. Well, my husband was so tired of backing his car out onto Winnetka Avenue and asking all of you children to move your cars, That was very inconvenient. And he said, "Please go out and find a house that has a circular drive." Now, that was the only thing he mentioned. Had to have a circular drive. So I looked every place. Started in Lake Forest, because I knew his brother and his family lived there, and they all loved it. So I thought, well, maybe we should look there, but I couldn't find any place at all that had a circular drive. I don't know.
So you did the house hunting?
Yes, I did. Looked and looked and looked. And finally saw this place in Northfield. I thought, oh, it seemed to have everything, to my way of thinking. It had the circular drive, and a drive, you go straight back to the garage, or come around in front of the house, and go out again. So I thought, that'll just be perfect. It was a little bit close to the Edens Highway, and I knew that it might be sort of noisy, but it was the home was on an acre, and I thought it was beautiful. It was a beautiful home. And I was very excited about it. Went home that evening and told my husband I thought I had found the house. I don't remember what it was. Oh, I know one thing that he had an exception about was it was a Hempel home, and he always used metal framed windows, the metal, and that would sort of cause moisture and then frosting up and whatever. He didn't like that. But anyway, he knew I liked it very much, and he made a very low bid on the house and got it. And it was such a good deal, and he was a businessman. He couldn't resist that bargain. So we did buy the house and lived there 37 years. We had thought we would finish the upper floor, there was a whole third floor. It was what do you call it, a bi-level or tri-level. There were a few steps down, a couple down to the living room, and then about 6 more steps down to the lower level, where there was a family room and a television room and a laundry room, powder room. It was a very nice house, I thought. And it had an outdoor exit there, which seemed convenient, out to the backyard. And there were only 3 bedrooms upstairs, and we thought, well, we could just finish one above, the attic was, you know, it was all you had to do was floor and everything. We were going to finish that. And then we realized we didn't need to because we were left there. All of a sudden, Linda was married. You boys were away at college. And Gay was married by that time, I'm sure.
There was also a period when Gay lived there.
Oh, yes. We fixed the, we called it the garden room. And we just fixed that. It was next from the house to the garage. That was all enclosed. So that's where she lived with her 2 little children. And they were there, I believe, a year and a half. I think a year and a half. She had gotten a job with Dr. Fabric, a periodontist, and so she decided to go to dental school. How do I say that?
Yeah, well, dental hygienist.
Dental hygienist, and that was down in Park Forest, and I was her guinea pig, and I would drive down there, you know, so she could work on my teeth. I was her patient, and of course she was left-handed, and they forced her to use her right hand. So I went with some trepidation. I thought, how could I ever, being right-handed, how could I ever do anything with my left hand? But anyway, she did, and I go down there quite often. I don't know about Kim. I suppose Jack took care of her while I was gone as the patient. I don't remember. But
So how about Kim?
Oh, well, she was a delight. Born June the 10th, 1961. So by the time we moved to Northfield, I guess she was, 5 or something like that, you know. And it wasn't long then when Gay came back with her 2 children. I thought that worked out beautifully because Kim was an only child up to that point. And then at least the others were gone, you know, and grown up. Gay had gone to Purdue and immediately got married and had a baby. And anyway, I went to help her when she came home from having her baby, just to be her assistant. I, of course, did not want her to know I was pregnant because I didn't want to take any of the glamour away from the first grandchild. She had Scott Edward Fleck was his name, a lovely little baby. But anyway, it confused her somewhat. She came to me and she said, now, pointing to Kim, she said, now, is she my aunt or am I her aunt? And I said, honey, believe this or not, she's your sister. She said, oh, don't ever tell anybody I said that. And it's just so much fun that I can't help but tell it. I hope she doesn't mind too much because it confused everybody. Even my husband was a little puzzled about the whole thing. He could hardly believe it.
So it was also about this time you guys got the farm.
It was about that time we bought this farm up outside of Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin. Just a short distance over the border. And it's 250 acres and a dairy farm. And we'd go there quite often. And my mother was even living too when we had the farm because I remember she would go with us. And she and I sometimes would stay all night, but Jack would not stay all night. And we always told him he was afraid there was a ghost there of what was his name, Mr. Altfelish, who had died in our cabin there. And we accused him he was afraid to stay there. And because he would, when it came time to go to bed, he'd go home, drive back, you know, to Northfield. He had to sleep in his own bed. I thought that was quite amusing. But Mother and I would stay there, and Kim, and we enjoyed it. It was a nice place, and we had lots of cows. We're the Holstein black and white cows, and it was a dairy farm, and we had a herdsman, Herb somebody. I've forgotten. Herb was his
Sorensen.
name, and Gertrude, I think it was his wife.
Sorensen?
What?
Jim Sorensen?
Well, Jim Sorensen
He was the farmer.
was the farmer.
Yeah.
He lived, down at the farmhouse and was farming the ground for us. And then the herdsman came to us one day to tell us he was moving to Arizona. And he gave us a 2 weeks notice. And we thought, my goodness, what will we do? What will we do with all these cows? We can't come up here every morning and evening and milk them. And finally, Jack and John Colmar, who was Jack's farmer partner, they decided we better sell the cows. So that's what we did. We had an auction. And they sold the whole herd. And they also sold the silos, which surprised me. So they had a big auction. And it seemed the house, after we would go back there, it always seemed so different because my husband would go to the fence and bellow, and all the cows would come running up to see who it was. I think they thought he was maybe a bull or something. I don't know, because he tried to make that sound. And they would come. And, oh, he just loved that. But it was different after the cows were gone. But we still went up there on weekends, just to enjoy. Oh, it was so nice, Had a nice retreat house there, paneled walls, and it was nice. And we put some of our antique furniture in there. And it was very cozy. Had a screened-in porch. It was very nice. We enjoyed it. Great big yard. I think the yard itself wasn't about 2.5 acres they had set aside as the yard, and we had an all-terrain vehicle that we would run around in the fields. Well, it was just a fun place to be. I enjoyed it. Everybody enjoyed it. We had a good time up there. The only one that didn't stay all night was my husband. He went home. He liked to sleep in his own bed.
How about some recollection of Kim when she was in school? Can you think of any kind of anecdotes there that?
Oh, I tell you, she was such a joy to me. I can't think of too many things except, as she said on the Phil Donahue show when they invited us to come there one time, because I was an older mother. I was 43 when she was born, and we went there to New York a couple of times to be on the Phil Donahue show. And on that thing, she mentioned that everything that happened at school, I was there, and that was true. I thought, now I'm older, but that doesn't mean I'm not as interested as every young mother in that school. And boy, I would be there. Be there with my gray hair, and of course that embarrassed her. All of which reminds me of what happened before she was born. I dreamed she was born with gray hair. Well, thank goodness she wasn't. She had beautiful dark brown hair. But I had that dream one time. But that was funny. But anyway, and it was nice for Kim. They came to live with us. And of course the 2 children then went to school with Kim. They were in kindergarten, the 3 of them at the same time. And it was like she had a little brother and sister, which was very nice. And they had playground equipment out in the backyard of our nice big yard, which was over an acre. And they had their swing set, and they had a cabin that they played, like that was their house. And, oh, they had a good time together. It was very good for Kim.
What about when you started working?
When I started working, well, when Kim got old enough to go to school, to start school, I did start working with McDrew Sales, the estate sale, it's Pat Drew and Molly Sale at the head of it. And of course I loved to do that because everybody that worked there, we were all friends. Most of them went to the Church of the Holy Comforter. Not all of them, but most of them did. And I did that for 29 years until we moved to the Hyatt, which is jumping way ahead to 2002. We moved there October the 2nd, which was my father's birthday in 2002.
we moved there, and Pat had said that she was going to give us a free sale when I moved. And I told her, well, I would be happy to pay for the mailing, which was over $600. She said, oh, well, that would be fine. And anyway, I called her after we moved to the Hyatt and said, oh, Pat, I don't believe that I have enough for a sale. She said, oh, you probably do. which turned out to be true. I believe it was Kim and Linda came to help sell things. Pat would let them come, but I wasn't even to come to the sale. She said, oh, you'd run up and grab stuff and say, oh, I didn't want to sell that. I said, that's exactly what I would have done, because I didn't want to part with any of my things, but I knew I had to. I couldn't move that whole household over in that apartment that we had. The major mishap.
Yeah,
Linda had been there visiting. Oh, in fact, she was still there, but she wasn't at our house that day that it happened. I think, was she at Tom's house? I'm not sure where she was. But anyway, she was there visiting, and they had been up in the attic. She and her daddy had been up in the attic, seeing, I think, if there's anything there that she might be able to use, because that attic was absolutely filled with everything. There was a dining room set, a complete dining room set of Aunt Ida's up there that I had always wanted to have down in my house in Northfield, and I kept putting it off, you know, getting it down there and refinished and what have you. But anyway, it was a Sunday morning, July 6th, 1986. I believe that's the correct date. And I had gone up and down the stairs quite a few times. Once I got a hat so I could go down and press the ribbons on it, you know, I wanted to look very nice. And we heard this alarm go off. And the only time I'd ever heard it was when I'd be broiling something and it'd get a little smoky. And my husband ran up there and he said, oh, call the fire department, the house is on fire. And of course I tried to call and already the line was dead. So I ran out the door to run down the street, and he ran across our Meadowview Drive to the man over there, Bill Barenko, and he said, Bill, call the fire department, our house is on fire. And Bill says, he was an older man, said, now Jack, it's too early for jokes. And Jack said, look at our house, Bill. You think all that smoke is a joke? And so he called the fire department. And I was running down the street, and I found the house that was open and asked them to call. Well, they'd already gotten the alarm. Then we came back, and the fire chief came. Well, he wasn't any help, but he just looked and saw that, yes, it was burning. And then finally the fire department from Northfield came. And it took a little while because they're a volunteer fire department. And then finally 6 trucks came from 6 different villages. You know, there's lots of action. And I was still in my robe. I hadn't really gotten my outfit for church on. And I just sat there. Jack just got me a chair, and he got a chair too. We just sat there like it was live television and watched the firemen in and out and pulling those hoses and working, trying to put out the fire. Oh dear. And then we stayed there, you know, quite a while later, because we didn't move out till 2002. And I would, well, it was a nice place to be, but we were getting older, you know. And one day, Priscilla Hecht came into work. She was one of my fellow workers at McDrew Sales, where I had worked for 29 years, which I was finished there. And it was conducted household furnishing sales. And she came in and told us she had bought an apartment out at the Glen in Glenview at the Hyatt. That's all she said. And I was very curious about it, because I know that she had a beautiful home in Kenilworth, and I was curious what kind of a place she bought. But anyway, I got to see it because one day, Gay was there. She came for Mother's Day. And I said to her after dinner, let's go over. Jack was going to look at the television. I said, let's go over and look at that Hyatt place over at Glenview. And I said, well, okay. And I had heard him tell all 5 children we were never, ever going to leave our home in Northfield. We were going to die right there. I knew that. I knew he said that. And I was well in accord with that. I thought, well, that's just fine. But he was getting so, he could hardly take care of the lawn, which was over an acre, although he had a riding mower. But I believe at that point he had gotten some help with his lawn. But there were other things that he usually did that he just wasn't really too anxious to do. But anyway, I had no motive in mind other than just to observe what it looked like. And so Gay took me over there, and they had a separate building for the model that you got to look at. So we parked and went in, and I thought, oh boy, is that beautiful. You know, I don't know whether I thought you got all that beautiful furniture that they had, but it was just lovely. And I thought, oh, this is such a pretty place. And I was quite impressed with the size. It was an ample size, you know. Anyway, when they said, every night you go down for dinner, I said, get the contract. Just like I was the boss. Get the contract. And they did, and I signed it. I don't even know that I read it very carefully. I was just so thrilled how beautiful it all was. And even wrote a $1,000 check, just like I was in charge, to make the down payment. I assume if it hadn't worked out, they may have given it back, but I don't know. But anyway, on the way home, I tried to blame Gay. I said, honey, why didn't you stop me? I got carried away. She said, Mother, I didn't stop you because I think you did a good thing. And that relieved me a little bit. But anyway, on the way home, I said, I don't believe I'll tell Jack today. It was kind of evening by that time, you know. I don't believe I'll tell him. So the next day, I thought, well, I have to tell him what I did. So I said, honey, we'd like to take you to the barber shop and get you all looking very chic. And then we want to show you something. That's all I said, show you something. Anyway, he got his hair cut and looked very nice. And on the way there, I sort of stumbled around, hinting at what I had done. I don't know if I actually said I made a down payment or not. I don't know just how far I got into that. But anyway, we got there, excuse me. We got there. He walked into the apartment, and he said, you did a good thing. And I almost fainted. Here, I've got the hiccups. I thought, my goodness, how nice, he likes it. And he was just acted just thrilled about it. And I thought, wowee, that's really something. I thought he might say, I divorce you.
Well, you've enjoyed good health.
Oh, I think I have, yes. Although I'm not perfect, but.
And you've been fortunate. I mean, you know, good life. You haven't had to work real hard.
No, I'd say
digging ditches or anything.
Hmm?
You haven't had to dig any ditches.
No, I haven't had to get out there and really work hard. I've enjoyed it, and I certainly enjoyed Kim. You know, she was sort of my buddy while my husband would go down to be on his boat down in Florida, you know, and play golf. Oh, and he would go on the Sweet 16 group, you know, the 16 men from the country club out at Rolling Green. He would go on their golf outings, different places. They would go to different places and be gone I don't know whether that'd be a week or how long those golfing outings took. But I knew they were having a good time, and he was going with his friends, John Colmar and Russ Moore, and you know. different though.
You got interested in artistic things through Kim, I think, didn't you?
Well, she was very artistic, and even when I don't even think she had started to school, and she asked me how to spell these words. Girls out selling jewelry. Necklaces, 25 cents. Bracelets, 15. And then she and the little neighbor girl, Heidi Sawyer, would go around our neighborhood, and of course our street was a private drive, so I felt that was perfectly safe for them to walk from house to house, and they were on acres, you know, each an acre, so they were out having a nice walk, and they would take these little slips and leave them at the houses, you know, that they were out selling jewelry. And then, can you believe this? In business, and I don't think she'd started to school yet, but anyway, she did make jewelry out of beads. Same thing she does today. Oh, I wish I were wearing something she had made. I'm wearing this, but this is just a magnetic thing that I bought out of the Methodist campground, where a friend of mine invited me to a craft show. But anyway, before she started school, I think she was making jewelry, designing and making the jewelry. And then she'd go back in a few days to take the orders, and they wouldn't buy things. I suppose it was just to please these two little girls. And then she'd come home and make her jewelry. And to think that that's her livelihood to this day. Oh, I just got the biggest kick out of that. And I also thought I didn't clean out the desk drawer very often, because I found those slips when we moved to the Hyatt in 2002. And I got the biggest kick out of her little slips there. And she took around to the customers.
What about your sculpture?
Oh, yes, I had fun doing that. I got started going to the senior center, and I found that very interesting over in Northfield. And there was a sculpture class, and I joined that, and I liked doing it. I can't say that I did too well, but anyway, I did do it and enjoyed it. And my teacher one day made ahead of me in just a few, I don't think she worked on half an hour. So I now have had it fired finally, because one of the ladies is a friend of mine, Rose Carroll, personal friend, and she works there. So she saw that in my apartment. She said, "Well, that isn't fired. I'm going to take that and have it fired for you." So she took it over there and they fired it. And then a man said, "Oh, I'd like to make that look like it's bronzed." So he finished it for me and made a stand for it, you know, to hold it. So I have that now in my living room. And it looks like my mother to me. And somebody else, one of the children said, "Oh, it looks like Grandma Jessie." And it really does. So I guess I look like my mother. But anyway, Kim was a joy. Oh, not that all of my children weren't. They were all, I love them to pieces. But she, of course, they were gone. And it was, then she was like an only child. And she was really sweet. Never once did she say, "Mother, do you have to come to school?" She didn't let me know at all that she was embarrassed by my gray hair. But I found it out on the Phil Donahue show. And some man in the audience jumped up and he said, "How could you say such a thing about your good-looking mother?" Oh, he was on my side. But it was fun. We had a good time there. And we got to go twice there. They called us back another time. Yeah. But the only thing I recall Tom saying one time, Tom said after he grew up quite a bit, "You were a great mother, but you didn't make enough cookies." And I thought I baked cookies all the time. But apparently he didn't think it was quite enough.
Mocambo, serrande abbassate, pioggia sulle insegne delle notti andate. quale storia tu vuoi che io racconti? Non so dirti no, 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 e ricomincerà come in un rendezvous. Scendo giù a prendermi un caffè, scusami un attimo, passa una mano qui così, sopra i miei lividi, ma come piove bene su, gli impermeabili, da 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 e non sull'anima. Ma come piove bene su gli impermeabili, da 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 e non sull'anima.